Welcome to this play talk. I was having technical difficulties. I'm not just gonna say that it was not planned, but I was using my microphone as a speaker, so I couldn't hear Christine. We're here, we're ready to roll, and I'm happy to start this play session where we will be talking about reading instruction. Tonight, we have a very special guest. She's a colleague and friend of mine. She's originally from Costa Rica and recently moved also to Orlando, Florida. So I am beyond thrilled to have her on board. Her name is Kristin Reiche. Christine worked with me many years ago, and she has vast experience in the reading and writing world, especially in intervention. So we are speaking in English, which is kind of weird because I figured since we teach reading instruction in English, we might as well just hold on to English. So, welcome, Christine. Welcome. I'm glad to have you on board. If you can share a little bit about you, we'll be thrilled to hear about it. See, you're frozen. Let me remove Christine. Let's see. Let's see. I cannot see you, Christine. Let's wait for her to join again. So, if you are listening to this play talk, you might as well just drop all the questions that you have. It could be either in Spanish or English. We can answer both on reading instruction. This is a very controversial topic, and we'll be talking about how and when to get kids into reading, when it looks, when it is appropriate, what steps to follow, and some of the myths that are around reading instruction. All right, let's wait for Christine to join again. Mhm. She lost her internet connection, so we're gonna give her a here. Here she is. But it's been such a struggle, but finally you're here.
I don't know. I don't even know what I said or where I left off.
Nothing. We could not
Oh,
hear you. So go ahead and introduce yourself and get
because I
started.
just kept on going and going and going and going, and then it was black and it kicked me out. All right. So yes. So like Mariana said, I recently moved to Orlando about 3 months ago. They transferred my husband here. And back home, I used to have a couple of projects in education. So one of them was a preschool that I sold to come here. And the other one was my private practice that what had another name. Now I call it Building Learning, and I'm starting from zero on my Instagram page. And I have been working for a very long time. I think it's almost like 20 years that I've been working. I'm a special ed teacher and an educational therapist. And lately, in the last years of my interventions, I have been focusing on structured literacy. So this really helps because I have not only been working.
We're losing you. All right, we're losing her. So um, let's give her some seconds to see if she hops along again. All right. So in the meantime, while she joins again, and if not, I'll continue talking. So we want to share with you what reading looks like. There is a lot of pressure towards reading instruction. Christine is moving herself all over the place. There you go. Let's see. Finally,
Let's see if this works. I was connecting my computer. Now I'm on my cell phone. So just in case if the internet goes out, I can still use
muy
my
bien, good.
phone. So let's
So
see if
let's
that
let's start from
works.
zero because
Hopefully.
we could barely hear you. So you said that you were doing um, more formal instruction of reading. Uh-huh.
Yes. Hold on just a second. Yes. So there we go. So I have been doing interventions, and mostly they have been lately in the last few years. They have been in structured literacy, working with dyslexic children, and with struggling readers, because not all reading difficulties are dyslexia. And
Mhm.
another side that I have been working on, mostly my interventions are in English, even though I work with mostly Costa Rican students because of the private schools back there. But also I have been working in Spanish. So there's like this whole other theory, but mainly my main focus in my formation has been in English more than in Spanish.
So tell us a little bit about that formal instruction that you refer, and a little bit about the science of reading and maybe understanding reading readiness.
Yes. So this is very important because we have been hearing a lot maybe about the science of reading and the science of reading here and the science of reading there. And the science of reading is not a method, or it's not a program that you can actually buy and implement. The science of reading, it's a vast and it's a variety of studies for over 50 years now, of scientists, of psychologists, neuropsychologists, educators, of a lot of professionals that have been studying reading in the brain, and
Mhm.
specifically in dyslexia. Why are there so many children struggling with reading? How can we help them? And what's going on in these brains, so that interventions or whatever it is that you're working with them can actually help. So based on those studies, that's when structured literacy, the National Reading Panel, they set up five important main components that need to be in any program. So either if you're working on intervention or in a class setting, if you work with these five main concepts or components of structured literacy, the students are going to grasp um, literacy. They're going to grasp reading much, much better. So why is that going to help us? Because if we start working correctly or teaching correctly to our students, we can identify very early who is having a difficulty, and those who are not, then they would
Mhm.
just move on, and they're going to be
One.
amazing readers, and they're going to be grasping everything that has to do with phonological awareness, with fluency, with comprehension, with vocabulary, and with all of those important areas that we need to work.
And what are these main areas that you're mentioning, that a program needs to have in order to be comprehensive or science of reading approved?
Exactly. So we're going to start with phonological awareness. Now, I'm going to have to make a parenthesis here,
Hmm.
because a few years back in Costa Rica, when we were both in our 20s, Mariana comes in one day and she's like, "We're going to start working phonological awareness." And we're like, "Huh? What?" This was a very long time ago. This was about
Hmm.
like 15 years ago. So a long, long time ago, Mariana, without even knowing it, she was actually working and she was starting with a little bit of structured literacy.
Hmm.
And she was like, "Yes, that's what we're going to add for all of our children that come." At that time, it was in Spanish, desarrollando mentes. And we're going to add
Hmm.
them. I'm going to train you. We're going to train everybody, and all the children, they're going to be reading. And it did. So
Yeah.
every intervention or every tutoring that was provided was with phonological awareness. So this
Hmm.
is a key component, because this is the first thing that we're going to work. So phonological awareness, and then maybe in a little bit, Mariana, you can give us some examples of phonological awareness in of those areas. The other one is going to be phonics.
Hmm.
Okay, so phonics is an important part because it's actually what comes after phonological awareness, right? And it's when we actually start to um, to join or to put together those sounds or those phonemes to a grapheme, and that would be to the printed letter,
Mm-hmm.
so that it's going to make more sense. So first, we have to work them with phonological awareness, with colors, with sounds, and manipulating all of those sounds, so that when we move on to phonics, that we can start decoding. And that's when decoding comes in. That's actually a good process when we actually get
And
there.
before you move in, Christine, so let's just tackle one of the main myths that we see around programs all over, not only in our country, Costa Rica, or here in the United States. Like I see it all over the world. So we see a lot of schools stressing on phonics and having children memorize the sounds of the letters and associating those sounds to those letters as young as 2 years old. So you
Mhm.
see the classrooms with all those letters and all those sounds and all those songs that go along with the letters, and a claim of there's no harm around it.
Mhm.
And so let's talk a little bit about that. How is that well seen? Is it doing more harm than good? Is there a right time to start doing it? What's the benefit of having children start with phonics and jumping over phonological awareness, or what, or actually what's the harm? Because I think that there's more harm than good if we skip phonics, and all this social pressure around children reading at age 2, at age 3. And I also have a very strong like idea behind reading, because there are children who read at age 3, and that's totally fine, they're ready for that.
Yeah, they're ready
but
for it.
but let's talk about this norm, and how does reading, now that we're talking between phonological awareness and phonics,
Mhm.
how does it look like? Because we say children are ready to read by age 7, and we're pushing them to read at age 4, 5. But it does not only mean that children should not be reading. It's how does reading really look like between age 2 and 7, and how important and why is it so important for this phonological awareness to take over phonics first and then move gradually into the phonics process.
Of course. Well, I mean, I think the research has shown us that for the kids, sometimes it comes naturally. You know, we have
Hmm.
all the ones that are like in the meme or in the medium or however you want to call them. So sometimes those are the kids that, you know, they're gonna grasp the reading, they grasp it and they start to figure out the words and they start to memorize the words, and it comes really easy. It's like, okay, I'm memorizing the words. And sometimes those books, they have pictures. So they're
Hmm.
not actually decoding, they're actually just using some of their memory, if their memory is not failing at some point. That's when we see one
Hmm.
of the first struggles. And they're actually guessing what the words are saying, but they're not really decoding. They're just
Hmm.
guessing around. So imagine, so we have these kids that they just guess it through and they are guessing what that means. But even if they're reading or they're fluent at some point, how about comprehension?
Hmm.
Going to be, you know, they're going to hit a wall eventually. Not all of them, but maybe, you know, there's certain things that could have been worked upon better. Whenever we work on phonological awareness, we are working on those foundations because we're working with sounds. You have to read, you have to learn how to read without the letters first. And that's phonological awareness. And there's actually an author, um, David Kilpatrick, and he is, wow, he's just amazing. If at some point, if you guys who are listening can research, he has this whole book about phonological awareness and about phonological awareness drills. And he says that phonological awareness drills, they must be done until the fourth grade. So whenever you're
Hmm.
teaching a class, even if it's spelling or reading or whatever it is, just take a minute, a couple of minutes, and do phonological awareness drills in the classroom. Why? Because that also prepares the brain, and it's going to make sense what you're actually going to be teaching them. Because that's what it means, you know, whenever you're using the 5 components of literacy, but it's an explicit, systematic program that follows the rules so that it makes sense to the students. Whenever we're just learning and we skip phonological awareness and we go to phonics and we're just memory, we're just not grasping completely. So those foundations, they're not going to be strong enough. And imagine if it's a struggling reader. So if it's a struggling reader and he just keeps up moving, that's why in fourth grade, when they do this national testing,
Mhm.
they fail so much because they're not really decoding. They're just guessing the words. There's not really a lot of comprehension going on there.
So basically, you're just saying that we are systemizing, like putting children into the system and mechanically teaching them how to read without actually understanding the reading process itself, right? Within the
Right.
traditional school system, and it's when if they have reading difficulties, it's after failure and years of failure and feeling unsuccessful that they actually we know that they are struggling with reading, which is very sad. And this also, it's, it is important for people to know that all the intervention reading programs, their bases are on phonological awareness. That's how
Mm-hmm.
it all starts. And intervention goes hand in hand with phonological awareness because that's what research shows and what science of reading shows. And
Mm-hmm.
now more and more programs are shifting into the science of reading because it's proven that it's actually what works for the brain, for the child, and how it moves on. So all children, not only children who are struggling with reading, deserve to start with phonological awareness. And phonological awareness in early years looks like songs, like um, fun sound drills, like nursery rhymes, like
Mm-hmm.
singing. So when people argue that children should not be reading at age 3, I say the opposite. I think children should be reading because they should be singing, they should be playing with words, they should be reading books with their
Rhyming.
parents. That's
Yes.
how reading really looks like at age 3, at age 4. And we are we're setting up the wrong statement. So we might just say that children are ready to decode by age 7, but children are ready to read since they are born because we come to this world ready to read our world and to play with our caregivers, and that's how reading looks like at age 0 months of age. So let's move on into, so we know phonological awareness is
Yes.
crucial. And I and Christine, now that she mentioned that, my story behind phonological awareness is not just that I'm just a little bit of a nerd and that I research it. It was just because of chance, because I happened to work with a company at that time that had a reading company, really great reading and handwriting without tears. And I had to do a lot of research for their product development. And I came across phonological awareness, and the first um, mainstream curriculums trying to incorporate phonological awareness into the everyday classroom, not an intervention world. So when I saw it, I was just mesmerized because I had never seen that, and it made so much sense. And that's when I
Mm-hmm.
created to my very simple phonological awareness drill, which I still sell it. And I think that up to this date, it is so simple and so easy to follow that it gives parents and educators such a great way to get started once you become an educator. And there's a lot of resources right now in the market that are amazing and that you can continue to learn from. You can find more and more resources, but for phonological awareness to take off, we really need to knock down all these um, myths of children being ready for kindergarten and children being that I mean, kindergarten is like third grade now. They have to read all these long paragraphs and they have to memorize, I don't know how many hundreds of words and sight words, which is another controversial topic, which does not make any sense. We only remember
Mm-hmm.
those words that need to be remembered because there's no rule um, to decode them. But
Mm-hmm.
children are obligated to memorize thousands and hundreds of words just to read without a purpose, not adding to their comprehension skills. So, all these reading programs guaranteeing success from early years, and all these being ready for kindergarten, and all these, the earlier is better, does not make any sense. It's actually harming children rather than giving them the correct foundations. And that's why children, when they hit this wall, are almost in second, third, or fourth grade, and they have lost time because the earlier the intervention, the faster they will learn how to.
Definitely.
Can we add more of these areas? So we talked about phonological awareness, then we moved into
Yes.
phonics.
So we have phonological awareness, we have phonics. And in phonics, before I move on, it's very important that we work it with in a multisensory manner, that you can create, that you can start before you actually get a paper and you start reading it on paper and reading all these words. You actually build the words, or you use tiles to build them so that it makes sense. When you're moving from the tiles from phonological awareness with the colors and manipulating sounds, and then you move to the letters, it's actually the same teaching. We're just going to be advancing that teaching more
Mhm.
complex so that it makes sense. So before we can actually read at cat and do the blending, we already did it a gazillion times with
Mhm.
cat, with bat, with mat, auditory. And instead of having one letter, or the three letters, we're going to have three different sounds, and we're going to change them. And that's how we start a little bit of that manipulation and of that reading before. So we start with phonological awareness, then we move on to phonics. Then after that, we have, and there's actually not a specific order in how we actually work them, but we're going to have vocabulary, we're going to have comprehension, we're going to have fluency. So, in all of these areas that we're going to have, well, fluency, we need it to read. Whenever we're reading, we need to be fluent in the word that we're reading. But for that, I need to have all of these other skills that I did work before in phonological awareness and in phonics, so that it actually makes sense. We're going to have comprehension, comprehension of language, comprehension of what we are reading, comprehension of what we see, and of course, vocabulary. We need to have a lot of vocabulary so that we can understand, so that we can comprehend, or so that we can be fluent whenever we are reading. So, whenever we have all of these components and we put them all together and we're actually working, we're going to have a very successful child in reading. Whenever, if it's a child that has dyslexia and that's struggling, continue to work all of these areas. And then if the child continues after many months or many years, sometimes it happens in a lot of many years of intervention, still spelling, because sometimes there's always an area that they're always going to be struggling just a little bit. We have all these assistive tools now that
Mhm.
exist, but they need to be trained for them.
Mhm.
But that's later on when we move it. And if we're working all of these areas and we have struggling readers, we can just say, okay, it was just a struggling. He was not
Mhm.
there. He was not in that reading process. He was not in that class at that time.
Mhm.
Um, and if we start to work in kindergarten, as we mentioned before, phonological awareness and all that rhyming and all of those songs and all of these colors and memorizing numbers and seeing the printed letter, just a little bit phonological awareness and phonics and all of this, we can identify
Mhm.
very, very early. We can identify if there is a learning difficulty. A couple of years ago, I went to that DyslexiaCon, the International Dyslexia Association, and it was amazing. It was just after COVID, so everyone. So I went with a friend, and we were just like going crazy because it was all in person. So we were very grateful to be in person. And there was a lot of people. This was in Texas, and there is an author which and he autographed the book, and he has made a lot of research in this field. It's very interesting just to be in his lectures and to listen to him speak. And he said something, and when he went up on stage, and the first thing that he said was, I'm going to say something that's going to be not a lot of people are going to like it, but we can prevent dyslexia. And everyone was like, what? No, how can you actually prevent dyslexia? If you are dyslexic, you're born dyslexic, you die dyslexic. How can we prevent dyslexia? So what he said is what we hear a lot about today. So that's where it came from Dr. Jack Fletcher. And what he said was, if we begin early intervention and we start to work with these children before they
Mhm.
get to elementary,
Mhm.
it's a life changer. Because not necessarily if they're struggling in kindergarten,
Mhm.
they they're going to move up and yes, they're dyslexic, or no, they're dyslexic. Sometimes it's just a little push that they need, or that they need to be working with these components that the science of reading has been teaching us a
So
lot.
imagine, just picture what you just said. So we have this powerful message of children should not be reading before age 7, and we're not phrasing it right because before age 7, children should be reading by playing, basically, with all these sounds, with all these phonological awareness drills and activities that can be done. And teachers and parents are not trained or educated around it. So we are missing out on one of the most important portions of the reading instruction, which is
Yeah,
the informal reading instruction at the beginning of our lives. So we are enriching all these children's journeys with powerful strategies that will be life changing within their reading process. Um,
completely. And not only reading, but writing. Because I think
mhm,
we were talking about that today, that writing is one of the most abstract and it's one of the most difficult areas in literacy,
mhm,
when you actually get to put all of these sentences on a paper. So we
mhm,
ask our children, write a complete sentence, go back and write a complete sentences, and we don't even speak in complete sentences.
mhm,
So it's so complex. How do we model this? What do we do as teachers? How do we model whenever we are teaching our writing, or we're doing intervention in writing, or when we're teaching to a class how to write? How do we make it? How do we put our ideas? Where is that vocabulary that we are talking about? Sometimes it's so hard. I've had many kids. We look at a picture and there is like it's a beautiful scenery, and there's like under the ocean, and you can just visualize it, or you can imagine it. So it's completely blue, and you can see a little bit like of the water movement, and you're going to see a yellow a yellow octopus, big, taking almost half the picture, and then you're going to be seeing, like in a triangle form of a way, you're going to
mhm,
see little fish that are right there, and they're red, and they're like looking at the octopus. So you see all of this, and as I'm saying it, probably many of you are imagining what I'm saying, what I'm
mhm,
describing. So I've had many kids before that I show them this exact picture because I know it so well, and they cannot write anything, or sometimes not
mhm,
even express it verbally. I mean, we know they can talk. They have, I mean, there's, they can talk. They have vocabulary. They just don't extract it. So that's another part that we have to talk about. And that's the part that was there also in the
mhm,
components of literacy. That's vocabulary. So, how do we work this with babies or with little children? Whenever, even when we go to the supermarket, something
mhm,
so simple, and I do that with my baby. She's 10 months old. I sit her on the, when I go to the supermarket, sometimes I order online, but when I go to the supermarket, I sit her down and I'm just talking. I look like a crazy lady talking to the
mhm,
baby, but we're like going through the carrots and talk to her. And then I grab the carrot and I make her touch the carrot. It's so cold, the carrot. And, having all this vocabulary, it's just going to enhance them. And it's just going to help them so much later on, whenever they're reading, or when they're reading by themselves, or whenever we are reading to them.
And nowadays, with all this screen usage, we are limiting all these vocabulary development and all these oral language development overall. So we are
No,
compromising reading from every different angle and perspective. Reading is a
definitely.
science. It's art. It's an art to be able
It,
to read and decode and put all these sounds together and all these letters, and be able to move on into this world and have children enjoy reading is actually a big challenge in the current era.
yes. And especially because we also need to model it as parents.
Hmm.
So I mean, we're with our phones more than we are with our spouses if we're married, or more than we
Yeah.
are with our children. I mean, we lose our phones and we lose our minds, and that
Hmm.
is true. Or the phone stops working and we want to die because we need it to pay emails and even to work. So we're stuck with it all day long. So
Hmm.
sometimes it's so hard just to put your phone away. And I'm trying to do this with my kids, just to put the phone away and let's get a book and we're going to read just 10 minutes before we go to bed. I'm reading a parenting book, but I try and hide it so they think it's a novel. Take away the cover. They're like, Mom, what's the book about? Oh, it's a novel. Is it scary because you took away and I'm like, yeah, totally scary. So we just read a little bit, and everyone is just reading, and even the baby, I give her a book, and that's what one of the first things, and she takes the book around, and then she's trying to open it and chew it and everything. But that's that exposure that we need to have,
Mhm.
because the same thing when I'm in the supermarket, or when I'm walking through the mall, I see children with cell phones in their, whenever they're walking, and it's like,
So
wow, that's
you're
not
missing
life.
out on
You're
the
not.
world, on the
They're missing out
mm,
on the world. The same in the car. I remember a few years back, we used to have a friends, and they used to have an Odyssey, and it had a TV. So whenever we used to travel together, my kids would just, can we go in the Odyssey? And they would just, vroom, they would just go. Well, they like to travel in other people's cars. So they went to the Odyssey, and they, of course, they loved, because they wanted to watch a movie whenever they were driving around. And then they were like, your car is so boring. There's no TV. And I'm like, what? Our car is the best. We can look out the window. Look how beautiful Costa Rica is. Look at this. Look at that. Look at the mountain.
yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and all this oral language development is crucial in the reading process. We have vocabulary. Um, we tend to think that reading is just about decoding, and that's one of the elements in this formula of science of
Mm-hmm.
reading. And
Mm-hmm.
the big question here, Christine, and I want to share a little bit about what we will be doing together, is how to get started in this journey, because it is overwhelming for parents, and it's overwhelming for educators. There's a lot of resources that we would want to share with you all, and we will be happy to do so later on. But as educators, you need to ask your schools to fall for reading programs that actually align themselves to the science of reading. It is what works, it's what's proven. And as parents, it's very important that you get educated around the reading process. It's not about forcing children in early ages, it's about um, giving them the tools to be successful readers, and that involves connection, and that involves you being present and reading books and playing and singing songs and nursery rhymes and cultivating this love for reading. Christine and I are we're working actually into, I've always wanted to create a reading um, course, and I've developed a right. I don't know why I did the writing before the reading, but I have the phonological awareness component already created since many years ago. And I invited Christine on board to develop quick webinar on reading and reading instruction from ages 0 through 7, and how it really looks like. How can we develop all these areas that we have been talking about? How can we actually, in easy steps, how can we promote all of these areas? How can we identify the needs? How can we put them into action? And we will be having a webinar. I'm going to share here the link in a minute, which I'm also going to share it on the chat. And I know that there's going to be a lot of people watching afterwards. And these it is a low cost webinar, and I invite you to go and check out the website and sign up. It's going to be in September. We're already working on it, and we're looking forward to sharing more, and more than sharing, informing about good practices, giving resources, directing parents into the right direction, and giving tools, and all these tools that we have found as educators by doing our research and studying and figuring it out. Because at the end of the day, we've figured out there are a lot of great colleagues out here in the world that are doing amazing things that need to be receive this shout out, and programs that we can guide you through acquiring to teach reading for the 21st century, which is aligned with the science of reading.
Completely true. That is true. And it's also, just to add a little bit to what Mariana is saying. What we are also working on is that, and that this is something that I think we both like to do. We like to have research behind what we do, not
Mhm.
only put ideas because they're out there, but there's research behind it, and that's what works because we have these foundations, and now we know more. Today we know more about the brain than we used to. Today we know
Mhm.
more about reading than we used to. So let's be, you know.
Muy bien. And I want, and of course, it's a live webinar. It's not going to be pre-recorded. It is going to be an hour and a half long.
Mhm.
Hopefully, it will become a longer course at some point later on.
Yes.
But this is going to be a short, easy webinar to get started. If you have taken my math lab and emergent writing course, it's something like that, but with reading. So you're more than welcome to join and to participate in this webinar to acquire, because it's very hard to share all this information in only 30 minutes here in this play
Yes.
talk. So Christine, thank you so much. And you will also have access to this play talk in our podcast, Play Talks, which you can also find on Spotify. And I recorded a session with Christine a couple of months ago in Spanish that I'm going to relaunch into the
Hmm.
podcast as well for those Spanish speaking people. And I know that it is super weird that we are doing this in English, but honestly, Christine does have experience teaching Spanish, reading in Spanish. I have zero experience. It's just out of logic, and that's not something that I feel comfortable doing at all. So maybe that's an idea that we give Christine to develop in the
Yes.
near future on her. And make sure that you follow her on building learning. She
Learning.
also has an account in Spanish. Let me share this account here in
And
comments.
they're both new because I sold my businesses back home. Now we're starting.
So go give her love, because starting from zero takes
Yes.
courage. So thank you very much, Christine, for being here. Thank you all for listening, and those who will be listening later on. I hope that you enjoy this space, continue to learn, continue to advocate for 21st century education.